Welcome back to the Lean Change Management Podcast. So this is the second video interview that we're trying out. So the last one featured Paul Gibbons, who kicked off the audio version of the podcast just over a year ago. And I'm pretty excited to have Ryan Lockard here, who is one of the board members of Agile Uprising, which is a coalition actually that I belong to. So I'll say that bias right up at the start. Ryan's based in Philly, and we're both hockey fans, which is pretty cool. So we had just a pretty good chat before setting up this call about our frustrations with our teams. But it's looking up for mine, and hopefully things will turn around for you guys in Philly too. So welcome,
Ryan. Upswing. Thank you very much for having me on, Jason. I appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So as you mentioned, lifelong Philadelphia resident. So I've been hanging on to those sports teams for quite a while. We have one World Series under our belt, but the rest of the teams need to start stepping up. Mm-hmm. By trade, I've worked in basically, I cut my teeth in project management, and then shifted almost immediately after project management straight into more technical roles. I have a bit of a technical base, and currently I've been given the lofty title of manager of software engineering for a local clinical, scientific, and academic publishing company historically, but I'm working in the healthcare space today. As you said, associated with the Agile Uprising. Also have some relationships with the Happy Melly organization as well.
Cool. So how did Agile Uprising come about? Tell us a little bit about what happened there.
It's interesting because when I tell this story, I almost feel like it's contrived or it's artificial just because of the organic nature of it. But the reality is this: there was a conference in the Philadelphia area put on by Alistair Coburn and Genesis Consulting for his Heart of Agile movement that he's been pushing. And in that conference, I ran into a group of individuals I'd seen at previous conferences in both through the Scrum Alliance, some regional things, and then some even smaller meetups and such. And I think it was probably about the fourth or fifth hour of the happy hour the first afternoon that we realized that we're all saying the same things. And what emerged from that was really a group of initially probably about 5 to 6 folks that jumped on a Slack instance, and we just started talking. And that initial group of 5 or 6 grew, probably doubled. And after about a month or two, the conversation that was happening in that Slack channel was bringing about more value than what I was getting through my other Agile communities. And it almost felt selfish to not open it up to others. While there was the group of 10 of us that were having really good conversations, it felt selfish. We started looking into the options of going with the commercial license of Slack, and for whatever reason, that just seemed to be a little bit too cost prohibitive. We wanted to make this free. We wanted to have a $0 barrier to entry. We wanted the only admission to be just curiosity and interest. So we stood up a website built off of a social community open source project, and we called it the Agile Uprising Coalition. And since then, it's kind of grown into its own little thing right now. We got a podcast, a blog, the community itself. We have our first physical meetup coming up next month, and there is talks of a conference. So it's for 3 or 4 months old. It's really gotten some legs under it.
Oh, it's cool. That's sounds kind of similar to how the Agile movement happened in the first place, because I listened to a couple of the podcasts that you had with some of the signatories. The one that I just listened to actually was the one with Ron Jeffries, and he was talking a little bit about how the meetup in Salt Lake happened back then. But it seems to be that's the way change works nowadays. I've spent more of my time in the organizational change and change management space over the last, I guess, 4 or 5 years. And we like to think that it happens with budgets and schedules and plans and stuff, but that it really happens with people that have an idea that has a purpose behind it, and then it just happens. It happens and evolves, which is pretty interesting, because that's sort of part of my I think input into the Take Agile Back movement and things like that is to let's go back to how that type of stuff happens and use that as our meta models for bringing change.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, any parallel you draw between anything that I will ever do with the inception of the Agile movement with the signatories, I'm going to go ahead and say you're probably making a stretch, but I'll take it. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I think it does evolve the same way, because I was at the Agile Alliance conference where it was the 10-year anniversary of the manifesto, and they brought it back.
Yep.
And I think they were asking some questions around, should anything change about the manifesto? Did you see this happening? And it was the same thing. They just got together because a handful of them liked skiing, and there you go. You never know how it's going to evolve. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've either completed. So there were 17 signers. We either just completed 10 or 11. I lose track. We actually have a Kanban board to keep track of it, so you don't have to rely on my memory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting when you talk to them. We try to ask similar questions so that there's a theme or a thread throughout the interviews. But as you know, the conversation emerges, and somebody mentions snowshoeing. Next thing you know, you're talking about what the heck snowshoeing is.
Mm-hmm.
But they ended up in Salt Lake. They ended up in that resort in Snowbird, and what came out of it was the manifesto for software software projects, and the other option was actually a Caribbean island. So I always kind of I always kind of wonder in the back of my head when they bring this up whether or not anything would have been different if they were sitting under palm trees instead of under a chairlift.
Yeah. Well, it's funny how Ron mentioned that maybe agile wasn't the right word to use back then, but here we are 15 years later, and you know, the whole thing behind how these types of changes and movements happen is there's always a counter movement that seems to happen. And I think, you know, I've written a lot about this and spoken about how agile kind of in the early 2000s, you know, I worked for a company, and we were using some of the practices, but we didn't know agile was a thing back then. And I think a lot of people that fell into the agile space, it was the same. They saw this set of values and principles and went, hey, that's kind of the way I work right now. And people just went off and did it. And then as it started to become more popularized, and you've seen the 40 agile method slide.
Yep.
As well. So many things have been invented and reinvented over the last 15 years that you start to attract people with, you know, they need a framework or a method to figure out how it works. And then as that grows and grows and grows, it kind of gets out of control. You end up with some of those big, huge diagrams that we've all seen and kind of poked at a bit. And then the counter movements start to happen. So I know Tim Ottinger had his Take Agile Back stuff that he's been working on. And so it's interesting to see there's always this kind of push-pull type of balance for this type of stuff.
Yeah, and I get conflicted when we talk about the Take Agile Back conversation, because in my mind, I don't know that Agile's actually lost. I think what happens is, to your point, there's counter movements and there's like the scaling, which I'm sure we'll probably start scratching the surface on at some point. And for me, it's just like anything else in my life, be it professional, personal, or even hockey. I tend to gravitate towards the things that make me happy. I tend to gravitate towards the things that I agree with. And if I start seeing something emerge either within the Agile community or under the Agile umbrella that just doesn't scratch the itch that I have, I just I learn as much about it as I can so I can be educated. And so maybe there is something I can extract from that, but I just remove myself from it if it's not something that interests me. Some of my counterparts on the board within the Agile Uprising are those enterprise type coaches, those guys that love working with the 50, 75, multiple hundred team organizations. That's just not me. It's not something that's going to get me out of bed. I'd rather work with a manageable, in my opinion, number of teams. And this is no slight on them or anybody that feels this way. It's just, I know I have enough self-awareness to know that once you start getting above 10 teams, I just don't feel like that's the type of organization, if you want to call it the type of Agile, but the type of organization that I want to work in. I like feeling the pulse of the change. I like seeing meaningful small increments that are pushing out working software that are high quality and driving value for the users and for the stakeholders. So for me, there's some self-discovery that had to happen, but I don't think that I personally ever lost Agile. There's anything to take back. I think what there is the the challenge that every person has to figure out what it is that they're looking for and what satisfies them, what makes them happy, and then try to align themselves with an organization that enables it.
Yeah, that's cool that you mentioned that, because there's a lot of times that I've either posted, responded to blog posts or whatever, and just asking people, why do they care if companies are using SAFe for some of these big frameworks? Why do some agile practitioners seem to take personal offense to it? Who cares? It's their company. You know, if it was my company and I was a CEO of a 30,000 person organization, I'd probably do something different. But it's not my company. And when I first got involved in the Agile community, I didn't have a really good first experience. And it's something that I see at conferences nowadays, where you get, quote unquote, traditional project managers or managers coming in and asking legitimate questions, but sort of getting shoved aside that, oh, you don't have the right mindset, and they're kind of chastised and, treated like they're idiots. That was my first experience at an Agile conference too. That people were going, at the time, this is when the being versus doing debates were kind of at the peak, or at front and center. And I remember having that conversation where I was trying to ask, well, why would an organization care about Agile or practices or whatever? Because they're delivering stuff to customers. Who cares if they're using method A or method B? And I was pretty much told that, you just don't get it yet. You don't understand it. And I'm like, well, hang on. Because most of my experience, it stemmed from big organizations, which I don't know why I kept going back to those. But you kind of get addicted to that unsolvable puzzle, and try to make a small difference at a time. But let companies do what they think is the right thing to do. Everybody's market is different. Everybody's environment is different.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that kind of comes through, especially in the signatory interviews that we're doing for the Agile Uprising podcast, is there seems to be this weird relationship with Scrum, and a lot of folks are. First of all, I get it. A lot of times people can confuse Agile as Scrum, or Scrum as Agile, and it's so much more. I mean, when you consider compare mindset with a framework, things really get a little fuzzy anyway. But I think it was in jest, and I think it was Bob Martin, when we spoke with him and we asked that famous same question, what would you change if you change anything? He said, don't just do Scrum, damn it. And and I think that's part of the pushback now. It's kind of it's kind of a reaction to the overwhelming impact that Scrum has had on the Agile community. And the reality is this: almost every time I come into a new team or a new organization and they want to start shifting towards something that's more of an Agile mindset, Scrum is almost always the best place to start for me, because it's simple to understand. It's something that you can go in there and help install in a relatively swift manner. But that's not, for me, the end goal isn't to get people using Scrum or to get people using Agile. It's to understand what problems they have. What is impeding their concept to cache work stream, and how can we get around it in the most efficient manner? And yeah, I mean, maybe it's not going to be dogmatic. Maybe we're going to have to make some compromises along the way, and that's okay. If it's a small organization or large organization, at the end of the day, what we're looking to do is we're looking to improve the value streams, and we're looking to improve the outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm surprised how that quickly gets overcomplicated, I guess, when there's too much of a focus on how do we find the right method, or how do we get this method to work the right way. One big organization that I worked with, I was surprised that they didn't have a lot of process. Or process. Sorry, I forgot. I have to say process in Canada and process.
Yeah. I felt like you were sitting next to me for a minute there.
And we're talking a 80,000 plus person organization, and this particular department of about 4,000 had no process at all. Process, damn it. And, they saw it as a bad thing, and I'm like, no, this is actually a good thing, because you don't have a lot of stuff to displace. Because I see, at least in big companies, there's they've got to push out some of their big waterfall frameworks or tool stacks or something like this. And it's funny how the pendulum always swings away from that big heavyweight stuff to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the teams have a little bit more control, and from the outside it looks like chaos, there's that desire to control it from a centralized place, and the pendulum swings back a little bit, and eventually it kind of rests in the middle. But these guys were starting with nothing. They didn't have to displace HP Quality Center or any big tool thing. They could start from wherever they wanted. And I thought that was a great place to start with Agile in that organization, at least.
It sounds like a trap to me. I don't know that I've ever heard that before, but it's interesting. It's funny because I was actually having a conversation with a colleague this morning, and he works in a different, for the corporate folks out there, he works in a different business unit as me, which means he works in a different sub company within the company. And for one team, not one Agile team, but one group of about 30 people, we were just talking about tools, and we were specifically about Jira. He said they had 26 different workflows for one team of about 30 people.
Wow.
It might have been 50 people, because I think I said something that's almost one workflow for every two people.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's amazing how you can compound confusion just when you're given the freedom to kind of allow the process to emerge itself.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about large organizations with many years of hard-coded process or waterfall methods, I call it organizational inertia, because you have this system that's been generating revenue, that's been generating usually a lot of revenue when you're talking about the enterprise for decades or sometimes even centuries. And then here we come as these change agents talking about this scary thing that we're calling Agile, which I think is actually something that we should get away from. And we're trying to inflict change on this big piece of mass that's been moving in a capital generating way. And we're trying to redirect it. It takes a hell of a lot of force to change the direction of that organization. And I say the reason we need to stop talking about Agile directly is just, I don't think many executives or anybody at the director or above level in these large organizations really care to hear about Scrum Master, story points, sprints, refactoring, test-driven development, any of that. They really don't care. This is a language that they don't want to speak, but yet we're trying to inflict that upon them. If we just start learning to, as change agents, learn how to talk in the language of the audience that we're talking to, I think we would be more successful, and we would actually allow for that change culture to be adopted a little bit more easily.
Yeah, it's true. The stance that I've been taking over the last, I guess couple of years is, as the change agent, is to be unseen and unheard by the rest of the organization. So wherever I'm being brought in, it's usually from a change team perspective. So either working with an organizational change team or a team of coaches or a management team or whatever it is. And the expectation is usually, well, we're going to bring an Agile coach in and they're going to come and fix all this stuff. And I switch it all around to say, I have no stake in the ownership and outcome of what it is you guys are doing. So I can help you from behind the scenes figure it out, what it is that you want to do and where you want to go. But you can't have me as the face of your transformation or the face of whatever you're going to do in your organization. And sometimes that scares them, because they see Agile is just different process model that we're gonna bring into our organization. And a friend of mine, Jürgen de Smet, who he's a management 3.0 facilitator, likes to say, for every blah blah problem, we create blah blah specialist. And then that's where you wake up 5 years later, and you're on a project team of 25 people, and none of them are developers or testers. And that's a true story from a recent client.
But the good news is they're all certified out the door, right?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, your approach to change management has been significant, and no, just because we're on your podcast is not the reason that I'm sharing this. When I did my introduction, I overlooked the fact that I've recently taken on an engagement with a university here in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg University. And I've been lucky enough to actually incorporate the lean change management concepts into a postgraduate curriculum. And I'm working directly in a lean product delivery course right now that I'm instructing with a class of eager individuals looking to learn about not just the TPS and the lean principles, but also the emerging concepts such as lean change management, lean startup, lean UX, all of those items in the vein that you really found a home.
Mm.
So
So in that program, is that graduate students? Is it continued education folks? Is it a mix of both?
it's 500 level graduate students
Okay.
continuing on their masters.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm teaching a course at Sheridan up here in Canada, and it's part of their BA program for continued education. So it'd be interesting to hear the perception that the difference in perception between people coming in through continuous education and they're almost coming to get deprogrammed a little bit because their reality has been PMI and more traditional older practices. What do you see as the reception to Agile, Lean, and all this other kind of stuff in that program?
Well, to be fair, I just finished week 2 yesterday. So,
Okay.
but the good news is most of the students that I have, actually all of the students I have are, it's not like they just went from senior year of college straight into a master's. They all seem to have some degree of practice behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big believer in applied learning, not so much in testing for learning. So the assignments thus far have been written assignments. And when I asked them about their experience with lean and agile practices, some of them are honest and they just say, I've only worked in waterfall. That's why I'm taking this. I'm hoping to learn a little bit more. But even the ones that are mentioning that they have worked in lean and agile organizations in the past, when they describe it, it's even though I try not to be a dogmatist or a purist, it's pretty far from what I think most people would commonly call lean and agile, which it has 2 different impacts on me. First of all, it makes me sad. It's like, these folks feel like, can you imagine the whole time feeling like you're associated with lean and agile, and then, someone to come along and say, that's really not what the principles are after. That's not what the mindset is after. But I'm also excited because they are trying to acquire the knowledge. They're reaching out and trying to learn a little bit more. And hopefully, hopefully I'm able to help send some of these guys in the right direction.
Yeah. Some of the coaches I work with up here, we've talked about creating the Agile experience. So something where it's a fish tank where you can go in and see what it is, and to see what a high functioning Agile team looks like. Because you would think, I'm based in Toronto, you would think that it's a pretty progressive city when it comes to that stuff, but it's pretty behind because it's mostly financial, insurance, old healthcare services. And it's really been, I guess, the last couple of years is when the Agile tipping point happened here. So, we've tried for 7-8 years to get meetups and things like that happening in the city. And it's usually just the Agile coaches that get together for those types of things. And then all of a sudden, a new meetup group started and they'll get, 200-300 people signed up for their meetups within a couple of hours and sell it out.
Wow.
But the challenge becomes kind of what you described is, they're learning Agile on a 2,000 person program in a bank. Mm-hmm. So they're not really getting a chance to see that titles don't matter, cross-functional collaboration, testers pairing with developers pairing with business folks. They're getting to see Agile and functional silos, more or less. Mm-hmm. And then
and I think that's one of the things that I'm going to bring it back to the Uprising right now, but I think that's one of the things that we're trying to drive forward with the Uprising. Even for this meetup that we have we have like a hard cap of 50 attendees, which I think it actually sold out right before I got on with you. The intent is not to foster yet another Scrum Master meetup, because any city you're in, whether you're in Toronto, you're in Philadelphia, you're in Boise, Idaho, or somewhere in Poland, there's Scrum Master meetups everywhere you go. What we're trying to do is, Kent Beck said it best, the reason that he came up with XP, the reason that he was associated with the Agile Manifesto group, was he was trying to make development safe for the developers again. We're trying to make sure that we don't have a room of 25 people that don't actually write code. We're trying to make sure that we're empowering the folks that need it most, which are not the project managers, the middle managers, the Scrum Masters, and the product owners. It's actually the people working with those business teams, the people that are trying to understand the problems and solution for them. Mm-hmm. So it's, believe it or not, more effort than you would think to start building a community that's centric around the principles, that's centric around the values, and trying to promote those beyond the various certifications and frameworks that are available.
Mm-hmm. What are the most common questions, comments, and things that you're getting either through the blog or after Agile Uprising was launched? What kind of patterns do you see with people that are coming in and knocking at the door or signing up?
Yeah, I think the hands down the biggest is, how do I talk to leadership about Agile?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny. I've personally been asked that question at every conference I've ever spoken at any conversation I've had with somebody that's either new or moderately into the Agile movement. And I don't have a canned answer for that yet. I think usually what I do is some variant of what I said earlier. Realize that when you talk to leadership, they don't give a damn about your certifications. They really don't care about sprints and story points.
Mm-hmm.
Learn what it is that actually motivates them, what's going to get them to support the change that you're looking to make, and speak in that language. Know your audience, right? What's in it for me?
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I keep going back to this whole idea of social movements and counter movements and how that type of stuff happens. Because the first official Agile team I ever worked with was I was Scrum Master on the team. We had 5 developers, 2 testers, a BA, product owner, and this was in an enterprise telecom. So we kind of set ourselves up in a bubble so we could work in isolation from the mothership.
Mm-hmm.
And after the end of the first sprint, same problem a lot of teams run into, which is, oh shit, we only have 2 hours to do all the testing before the sprint is over. So cram in all the work. And
2-week waterfalls. I love those.
Yeah, exactly. And in the retrospective, one of the developers who's a friend of mine who is now a coach that I work with, all he said was, maybe we should help the testers next time. And he'd been there for 10 years. He was kind of the unofficial team lead and just a really good catalyst that planted the idea in the team's head. And that's all it took. All it took was that one. I like to call them the movers. There's people that they have influence not through power or authority, but they have it through relationship and how relatable they are. And that's all it took. And I have never, this was 8 or 9 years ago, and I have never worked with a team like that before. So I think getting the people on the teams to spark a different way that they can talk to management, or a different way that they can break down the silos and the titles on their team, I think is the way to go, because that's going to start the dominoes falling. And then if you've seen the dancing guy video, where the guy starts dancing and then everybody, it's going to happen eventually. And eventually somebody high enough is going to notice to say, why is it working over there? And then they're going to try and figure out how to support it better.
So that buddy of yours, the developer that was that was that agent of change, and he had no authoritative power. When you have those moments, right? When you have that, I call them aha moments, where stuff just starts sinking and clicking, and then you go from a good team to a great team, or even a high performing team. That's why we do this. And when you see that happen in front of you, it's a beautiful thing. I will tell you right now, I'm in probably the greatest professional space I've ever been. I have 4 Agile teams in working on my program now, and I have no fear in saying this. I love my teams. I love the people on those teams. I love the fact that we have those guys like the gentleman that you mentioned, those girls like the gentleman that you mentioned, and we're effective in that space. But I also have the overhead support with leadership, and they give the latitude for us to take chances, the freedom to fail, the ability to learn, all of the things that we read in the books, that we hear in the motivational talks, that in practice go out the window as soon as you get given a project plan or a roadmap. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. It's awesome. It makes you actually spring your head off the pillow when you don't want to get out of bed in the morning, because you get to go in there and hang out with the people that are making change with you. So it's cool. So if for anyone that's listening or watches this and is not in the same place, it does happen. It just takes time. You have to be in the right place at the right time with the right team. But once you find it, it makes all of those years of working on the bad teams, which, by the way, I've done that too, it erodes, and all of a sudden you're in this happy nirvana, this euphoric place with these people that are going to battle with you every day, and you just want to be there. You don't want to miss a minute of it.
Yeah. That's I learned that lesson the hard way, because I remember early on helping these companies with their transformations. I used to take it pretty personal. It used to be pretty upsetting that you couldn't get the change to work. And then I realized, what is it that I'm actually trying to do? And it all kind of clicked once I started creeping into the, I guess, the more traditional change community. And there's a guy, Daryl Connor, who I guess you could kind of call him the godfather of change management, if you will. He's very well known in the traditional change circles and organizational development. And I saw him speak at a conference, a traditional, your typical stuffy change management conference. You know, you go to an Agile conference, people in t-shirts and jeans, and everybody there is in a suit, except for me. I'm in t-shirt and jeans. And he says, you know, he's very anti-tool now, as far as tools and methods and things like that. And he says, the work that we do, it's all about meaningful change. And if you're not, as a change agent, if you're not prepared to facilitate meaningful change, you shouldn't be in this profession. So get out. At a traditional change conference, he really went into it's about purpose, it's about meaning, it's about helping people love what they do again. That's why we do change work. We don't do change work to install a new process or install a new set of tools, but we're there to make a difference in people's lives. And I was shocked, because I was expecting everything's about the method and tools, because that's usually what you hear coming from those more traditional communities. And that helped me with my stance. But I see a shift from all areas of the business. I mean, I just came back from a 30,000 plus organization where, you know, the CEO is talking about love and vulnerability and stuff. And I'm like, whoa, because you couldn't have talked about that stuff 10 years ago in the business world. And it's nice to see how these different communities seem to be converging more around purpose, as opposed to superficial stuff like process improvement.
Yeah, and as superficial as it is, it still has a place, but it is nice to see that there's becoming more of a balance. I'm curious now, when you were in that conference, that change conference, and Daryl was giving that message, did you see others reacting the way you reacted, or was it right over their head and they didn't quite grasp it?
It was mostly over their head, but there were a handful of people that it's sort of the way every movement happens. Somebody's got to say it and do it first. And then the people that wanted to but couldn't for whatever reason kind of go, all right, now it's okay for me to talk about this stuff now. So there were a handful of people that completely agreed and loved it, and felt there was a bit of weight off their shoulders, that now, because an authoritative voice said it, now it was okay for them to do it. And then I would say at the time, the majority was still, yeah, that sounds good, but give us your next framework.
Yeah, there's safety for a legion of folks, and they use it as a crutch with the process and tools. If you have a process to fall back on, you don't have to use free build. You don't have to exert a contrarian thought. You can just sit there and say the process, the framework, or the tool says this, and we're going to do that. I mean, I think I'm probably going to speak for you a little bit here, but that's boring. Why not try to figure out, like, why not 5 why a problem? Figure out what the root cause is, and then try to drive that out and improve the overall standard operating procedure of an organization. So
yeah,
that's interesting, man.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. And the patterns when people move away from that stance seems to be pretty similar. So I've been either part of or worked with 2 change teams that all, they get tapped on the shoulder to get this Agile stuff to work, and 8 months to 12 months, they're all out of there. They all find another organization that's really doing it. So when I go into organizations now, it's kind of telling that story, that know what you're in for, because when you're saying you want this Agile stuff, I know that's not what they're asking for, because it's not what they're asking for. But recognize that the people who love working this way are going to get frustrated the fastest, and they're going to go somewhere else. It's just the way it works. So be prepared to deal with the dust when it gets kicked up.
So one of the more powerful stances that I get to exert is when I get brought in for, I have a full-time job, so I'm not a big-time independent consultant, but randomly I get asked to come into organizations and talk with leadership about agile transformation. And I leverage what you just said. You're either going to find a way to transform this organization to something that is a little bit more empowering, trustful, and allowing purpose, autonomy, and mastery for your individuals, or they're going to leave. And guess what? I'll hire them. I'll hire them, and I'll give them everything they need to be nurtured into the individual and the professional, the craftsperson that they want to be. And there's a lot more of me's than there are of you's. But let's start doing something together where as a community, as a culture, as a bunch of organizations, let's just start creating environments that are more healthy for folks. But I have a quick question for you. It's actually a similar question to what you asked me a few minutes ago. When you go out and you do your change conversations, or you do your blog posts, which sometimes the comments get really interesting on, what is the biggest resistor you're seeing within organizations? What is the pushback that you're getting?
I reframe the message a little bit. So I'm not, the change community is big on the resistance to change thing. So we've seen it with the version 1 Agile surveys too. Number 2 over the last 10 years has been resistance to change, which for me is, I don't know what happened, but it wasn't my fault. It was other people. I would say the forces are, that are working against it are structure. I'm in the camp that the culture follows the structure. So there's tangible levers that we can pull on. And there's a really old model by a guy named Jay Galbraith, who it's the STAR model. And he talks about how if you don't have these 5 elements in alignment, kind of like Voltron, it's just the change isn't going to work. And when we bring Agile in, we pull one of those 5 levers and we leave the rest of them just to figure out. And the forces against it are not understanding how Agile is going to break your organization until you live through all of your ceremonies. So companies that have the annual planning, budgeting, HR stuff, quarterly mass firings and hirings to meet the quarterly numbers, and all these rituals and ceremonies, they have to live through all of those while they're trying to get Agile to work. And that might be 12 to 18 months before they even can think about how Agile is going to affect their whole organization. And the force against that is just time. Well, we trained everybody. We got a bunch of certified people in here. Why aren't we fixed yet? And they forget that how to forget breaking down those structural boundaries and some of the other elements that model. And there's another one from McKinsey 7S that talks about the same thing, which is if you make a change in one area of these 6 dimensions, all the other ones change too, and a combination of those elements lead to the seventh S, which is our shared values or our culture. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying they think it's just an IT thing, and they forget that there's a whole ecosystem that is pushing and pulling. So as one group is bringing Agile in, there's the counter movement of another group that's trying to undermine it because they're threatened by it. And they fail to have those stripped down, honest, raw conversations in favor of more superficial stuff.
That's interesting. And I will never be able to look at the STAR model again without seeing Voltron now. So thank you.
Yeah. I have to keep talking about it because I got to figure out a way to put that in a presentation. So I've kind of exhausted using my daughter's My Little Ponies as a way to talk about personality differences. Yeah. So Voltron's next.
For what it's worth, I think I'm supposed to go to my mother's house this weekend. I may be in the attic now looking for my old Voltron.
So before we wrap up, tell me a little bit what's next for Agile Uprising. You mentioned you're looking at possibly doing that in-person event. Where are you guys taking this next?
Yeah, so that event is basically, we were approached by an organization that really just wanted to sponsor, they wanted to associate with us, and they offered to sponsor an event. So that one, probably by the time this gets published, is going to be well sold out and possibly even over. But we are looking to build the community out. We have the coalition.agileuprising.com, free to join, free to contribute. You don't have to join to read what's going on. And we just started something new. Our first publish was this week, where we're doing member spotlights. We're doing things similar to this, where we reach out to members that have a compelling story or an interesting story to tell, and we just do a quick conversation with them. But looking forward, we are hopefully going to wrap the Agile Manifesto author review in the coming weeks. And then it has not been publicly shared yet, but I guess speaking to the author of Lean Change Management, I can pull on your ear a little bit here. Leanapalooza is the working title of the next project that we're looking to do. So we're going to try to reach out to some of the lean change agents, the lean thought leaders, and throw a little bit of attention that way. So you may be getting an email from me in the coming months.
Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah, and then end of 2017, we're talking about a conference because the core of our board is here in the Philly area. We're probably going to be lazy and just do it here. But I think there's probably about 10 of us, and any Agile conference, any of the major Agile conferences in North America, some of us will be at. So yeah, track us down. We're nimble, so we change direction sometimes. We run lots of experiments to figure out what works and what doesn't. We'll pivot away if we need to.
Cool. Well, thanks very much for taking an evening to chat. I know you've got a day job, so I appreciate you taking the extra time to chat with me today.
Hey, I appreciate it. We get to talk about hockey, we get to talk about Agile, we get to talk about lean. So it's a good night, in my opinion.
Just make sure the Oilers are in town for the conference, then we'll get a little side bet going.
You know what? I'll see if I can make that happen.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Take care, buddy.
You too.